Read it right there. Big parts. I just want to share Jim Laundry and Escalante email from how's everything?
On the command.
Yeah, Mr. Luganville had been on your floor.
Okay.
And you guys actually pretty nice place. Nice.
It looks good. We need to make it good.
Yes, sir.
We have space now. We need to put the operating capacity to get by the command control spot. So,
Are you happy in the building? Or are you looking at getting back in the fleet?
yeah, put another year. Let's sort something else.
Yes, sir. Good stuff. Well, good seeing you.
Thanks, sir.
Let me ask you about
Now, Chief Staff Law Enforcement.
This should be the last year.
That's okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, could take a seat, please?
We're actually going to move this seat. Yeah, pull it. Good idea.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Michael Swetnam, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. I see many friends in the audience, and I welcome you all back. Thank you for coming. And for those of you who haven't been here before, the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies is a science and technology policy think tank, if you will, here in the Washington, D.C. area. We focus on the issues of science and technology and how science and technology is driving our society, our government, and the way we live. The intersection of science and technology and society is of particular interest to us, and I think you'll agree that today's topic is an area where science and technology is clearly changing many aspects of human activities around the world. I'd like to recognize amongst our audience, besides one of our key speakers, Ambassador Dave Smith, who is a senior fellow and a member of the Board of Regents at the Potomac Institute, a very key personality at the Potomac Institute, the Honorable Charles Hertzfeld, former DDR&E and then the director of DARPA, who's guided the Potomac Institute and many other events and affairs around Washington for many years. Thank you for being here, Charlie.
I've been waiting for lots of mistakes.
Only the good things. Only the good things. The series that we're embarking on here today is very important to the Potomac Institute. For those of you who have followed us for many years, you, I'm sure, are aware of our decade and a half involvement in issues surrounding terrorism. And we're very privileged to have Professor Yana Alexander and the International Center for Terrorism Studies here at the Potomac Institute that has published almost 100 books on all aspects of terrorism over the years, in particular 4 volumes that I helped participate in on cyber terrorism and our involvement in studying the technical and legal issues of cyber terrorism go back almost a decade. So it's very important that we help host a series of meetings, of which this is the first, to discuss some of the key issues surrounding the cyber problem, the cyber efforts in the United States and in the world to deal with these issues. This is absolutely, we think, one of the most profound science and technology policy issues that our society, that in fact mankind has faced in a very long time. It has to do with not just computers and hacking them or turning them, keeping viruses out of them. It has to do with the way we live now. Almost every aspect of our lives is in one way or another affected by computing technology. It helps make things better. It helps drive our business today. And just as all things that empower us in that way for the good, there is the great potential to use that technology for bad. And therein comes all the issues of surrounding the United States efforts to build a capability to deal with those who would use cyber technology for nefarious purposes. I would state 3 points before I turn the podium over to the tremendous people who have agreed to comment on these issues to kick off our series today. The first point I would make on cyber has to do with what traditionally has been termed in warfare the difference between strategic and tactical use of weapons and capability. Whenever you hear people talk about cyber, particularly in the media, they describe things that are almost always tactical, attacking a computer, even attacking a country's infrastructure for some immediate purpose. Cyber is always discussed as a tactical tool, either by a hacker or by a country or by a military arm. But in fact, it's been noted by many very distinguished scholars over the last couple of years that in fact the true value of cyber is probably strategic, not tactical at all. The fact that one entity, country, or group has the capability to alter the meaning or the content of what's in your systems, what you rely upon to make decisions, what you view as the truth. If someone is able to change that data in a significant way, the impact of that may not be tactical at all. It may not kill your computer, it may not turn off your bank, but it may well change the way your decision process runs, and certainly can affect the faith you have in the data you're using to run your society. The strategic use, the strategic impact of this technology clearly can far outstrip the tactical use of it from moment to moment of just destroying a computer. Dr. Paul Kaminski, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, noted in a Senate hearing and testimony that I was part of a year ago that there are many similarities between the use of cyber and the use of nuclear. You can use nuclear weapons to achieve tactical gains. And in fact, we built a series of tactical nuclear weapons in years past with the strategy of using them tactically if we were attacked in such a way. But the true value of nuclear weapons was in strategic deterrence. There's some great similarities between that and cyber. The most important use of cyber may not be in attacking anyone's computer. It may be in the ability of us to use cyber to manage what information is spread around the world about us and others. The second point I would make is that we're lacking a legal framework, if you will, for dealing with these issues on both the international and the domestic stage. Internationally, if you send a cruise missile through the window of an embassy in France, anybody's embassy in France, that's clearly considered by most people an act of war. But if you turn down or shut down the computer or corrupted the hard drive of somebody behind that window in that embassy, it's not really clear yet whether that's an act of war or whether that's malicious hacking or exactly what that is. We haven't really worked out amongst the nations the framework for dealing with cyber attacks and cyber efforts to fool with our data. On the domestic front, it's a little bit harder. It's harder because it's clearer. Let me run you through a scenario. If you're speeding down the highway and a policeman uses a radar gun, and using that radar gun, he captures that you're going too fast, that radar gun evidence gives him probable cause to pull you over. When he pulls you over, if he notices a bunch of little baggies with white stuff in them in your back seat, that's actually probable cause for him to search your car looking for drugs. If while he's searching your car looking for drugs, he finds a body in the trunk, there is actually a chain of evidence that says you can be prosecuted, and that's a legal search and seizure, and you can be prosecuted for murder. We've built up a body of law that allows all of that to happen and be accepted in our courtroom. We do not have an analogous body of law that says it's okay to look at the packets going across the internet and look for bad guys, and does that, finding a bad packet, does that give somebody the rights to look inside your computer? If they find something inside your computer, does that give them the right to look inside your home? That whole body of law is still in development. And lacking that, we lack a lot of the structure to do the things you might need to do if you really want to police the internet. And that brings me to my final point, and that is clearly the information highways on which all of this lives is becoming one of the most important byways of our time. In fact, people can say at a very high cursory level, it's equivalent to freedom of the seas. Without freedom of the seas, we couldn't have had commerce 100 years ago. We couldn't have commerce today. Without freedom of movement across the internet, many businesses, much of our world economy would probably come collapsing down. But who is it that's going to guarantee freedom of movement on the internet? Who's going to be the information highway policeman? And what rules are they going to use to do that job? These are extremely profound questions, questions for which we think a public dialogue with the best minds in the country and the world will be needed to address these issues if we have hope of finding a way through it and building the legal structure and an understanding and a strategy and a policy for using this most powerful enabling technology of information technology. We hope that the series that we're starting today can be a part of that. So what we've attempted to do is bring together in this series some of the leaders in the country, in fact in the world, on these issues to discuss various aspects of it and to solicit from you your thoughts and your ideas in an effort to build a public dialogue from which hopefully we can all derive in the future some directions and some options and some policy that'll help lead us through this new world that we face. And so we invite you to participate. There's going to be 3 presentations today by, as I said, some of I think the world's leaders on these issues. We invite you to ask them questions both now and later, and hopefully together we can address these issues in a meaningful way. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who very kindly has agreed to join us today, but we need to get him on the stage so we can interact with him quickly, because I know he has to run away and actually address these issues. Lieutenant General Robert Schmidle is the current Deputy Commander of the U.S. Cyber Command. He has actually been around all issues, as you would find, I think, if those of you who are familiar with the Marine Corps, you'll find that by the time they're wearing 3 stars, they have actually seen every part of what it means to be a combat officer, a warrior, and a manager. As absolutely the truth with General Schmidle. He has flown airplanes. He's an absolutely noted hero in many of these airplanes, receiving decorations for his many hours and his heroic activities and everything from A-18s to F-4s. But later on in life, he also served as a Deputy Chief of Staff for a product team, helped run a quadrennial defense review, the QDR here in town, and you all know what that means for DOD, and has been Director of Expeditionary Force Development Center for the Marine Corps. And on top of all of that, as I think most of you know, he is truly an enlightened person of today. He has a Master of Arts in Philosophy from American University and is currently a doctoral candidate to shortly, I believe, receive his doctorate from Georgetown University. He's published widely and spoken widely on social psychology and philosophy, So we have with us today a person who not only understands combat warfare technology, but the society who's being impacted by it. And he's in the perfect position to deal with those issues over the next couple of years, having just been selected as the Deputy Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. It's with great pleasure and a tremendous honor that I welcome to the Potomac Institute, General Robert Schmidle.
Thanks, Mike. Can you all hear me okay? I'll just talk from the Hey, for openers, thanks again for that, Mike. And as I look out in the audience when I came in here, I see a lot of old and new friends out here, and it's great to see some familiar faces. You know, there was a quote floating around last year about the QDR, and I'll think of who to attribute to in a second, but it starts like this. You know, if you wind up working on a QDR, it's proof that God hates you. And so, and I've now done 2 of them, so I don't know what that says about where I'm going next, but it probably can't be too positive. As the Deputy Commander of Cybercom, and I've been doing this since the first week of August last year, a lot of the issues that Mike talked about, I try to deal with and boil down to the practicality or to some kind of practicum, if you will, as I try to address these things. So what I'm going to talk to you about here for a few minutes is some of the things that are involved in our effort to do that. One of the things that Mike didn't mention is a number of years ago I got tied up in the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab and the Special Purpose MAGTF Experimental. And General Krulak stood up the Warfighting Lab back in the 90s. And he said, sally forth and do great things, and hopefully 1 or 2 of you all are actually going to get promoted and stay in the Marine Corps after you do all these things, because it's going to upset the conventional wisdom. But one of the issues that we looked at, spent a lot of time on, was at that time in the late 90s, this very nascent notion of networks and how we were going to network the battle space, the tactical battle space. And a lot of the things that I think that I learned at that point have stood me in great stead today. For example, in numerous iterations of the Command Operations Center, the COC that I stood up, the one that I eventually came to at the end of the day, we had all these wireless networks, and I mean, this stuff was basic. I mean, we had like access ports that were sitting on top of tripods that we bought from a camera store, literally. At the end of the day, where I wound up in my operations center is I, as the commander, wound up almost sitting back a little bit to give myself some distance from it. And the guy that was sitting next to me was not the 3, he was my communications officer. He was a guy that was responsible for keeping the networks up. And we actually had they built for me a presentation that showed where all the packets were in the operating system. And it kind of looked like the pipes you see on the Microsoft years ago, whatever version that was, 95 or something in Windows. And we would adjust the quality of service to everybody else in the command based on what we were seeing that was starting, and we were doing all this manually. And obviously a lot of it's done today in an automated sense, but the basic issues of trying to weaponize, if you will, this command and control capability and trying to use it as a weapon system. I find myself today in a very similar situation. We Cyber Command have 3 main lines of operation that we are responsible for. One is the operation of the gig, the DoD, anything that says .mil at the end of it. We are also responsible for defending the gig, and if we are ordered to and have the authorities to do offensive operations. And those 3 things seem to be in 3 nice, neat little bins, but the practicality of dealing with it is that they're anything but 3 nice, neat little bins. And in turn, it turns out that there really is a continuum. You can't do defensive operations effectively in cyberspace unless you are doing offensive operations, unless you're out there hunting on networks. You can't do those kinds of operations unless you have the accesses that you need in order to be able to get into those kind of things. And a lot of those accesses come from just the daily being on the net and developing that kind of situational awareness. So, that with that kind of as background, you know, one of the things that Mike talked about a second ago was that when we think about cyber, we tend to think about the tactical side of it as opposed to the strategic side. And I would suggest that one of the things that changes in a way that I don't know that we fully understand, as the intersection between technology and human activity, okay, and Mike mentioned that a minute ago, and everybody kind of thinks and focuses on that in terms of how we interface with the technology. I would suggest that one of the things that we haven't really thought through is the way that technology changes the way we experience the world. Because the way that we experience the world at the end of the day is what we are using as a way of reacting to it. So as technology comes between or becomes part of the way that we go about projecting, if you will, some of our thoughts, prejudices, and notions on the world, that to me is one of the sort of unanswered questions. And in terms of the way we rely on cyberspace, when I was running the special purpose MagTap there and doing these experiments, we brought the red teams in to kind of muck with our systems. And one of the things that I found to be the thing I found to be the most debilitating is when they got into the system and they corrupted the data just enough that the operators didn't trust it anymore. And when the guys and gals that were sitting there at the table looking at their screens stopped trusting the data, the next thing you knew, there were paper maps and pencils and crayons coming out because they had to have some way of being able to verify the integrity of the data. That is today, I would suggest, the most critical issue that we have to face with regard to our reliance on the networks. Because as opposed to just having no data, or if you knew that the data was it was all wrong, you're actually in a better place in terms of the way you're trying to deal with the world than you are if you're just not quite sure how much of it's accurate, or it's just a little bit wrong and you're not sure what else is in it. There's some technology things that we're looking at. There's this something that's known as hashing, trying to tag databases so that if you were the commander of an Aegis cruiser, for example, that you could come into the bridge and you could boot up your machine, you could bring up a page, whatever you're doing, and you could immediately tell whether or not that database had been changed at all since the last time that you looked at it. And just being able to do that instantaneously would, I think, it's a capability that we are working on hard and we're trying to bring together here. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on, two other things here. One of them Mike mentioned a second ago, which is this public dialogue on cyber. And I was up at Harvard 2 weeks ago at the Kennedy School up there, and Dick Clark, who wrote the book on cyber warfare, was one of the instructors in the class. There was about 60 folks in there, and it was their grad school. And so the questions were great questions, and they were very engaged. And there was about a half a dozen folks in there from other countries. And the person that was sitting right in the front row in front of me was from China, and which was all the more entertaining because the brief they had built for me had a slide in there about the disruption of the network, and it had a picture of a Chinese flag, and it said Google 2009 on the bottom of it. And as we were walking in there, my aide Scott, we were walking up the stairs, and somebody was talking in my right ear and saying, "Hey, look, these are the people that are going to be in the room." And he says to me, he says, "Well, do you want us to get in there now and pull that slide out of there?" And I said, "Nah, just leave it in there, and we'll see how much of a sense of humor we have here. See, we're working on this sort of hands across the water thing." He didn't say anything; he just stared at me. So anyway, but one of the issues that came up in that discussion that I was asked is, do you think we can have a reasonable, informed, a rich discussion about cyber at the unclassified level? And at first I thought for a second, and I said, no, I don't think so. And then the more I thought about it, the more I changed my mind. I said, no, I think you can. And I think it's similar to the discussions we had about nuclear weapons. You know, I think that raising a cadre of civilians, for example, that are deeply immersed in the theory and nature and understand cyber from a perspective that perhaps the practitioners do not, I think that's a good thing. I think it's very helpful. And I think that in some cases, I mean, if the nuclear stuff had never been, if we'd never elevated that, the only people who would have known about nuclear weapons or known much about them were those of us that were trying to plan to drop them. And that'll give you one solution set, but I don't know that that is the best solution set. So I think that in addition to just having the dialogue, I think that more broadly, what we are trying to do is to raise a generation of people that can think deeply about what cyber means in terms of its effect on human interaction, its effect on behavior, its effect on international relations, its effect on you name it, and whether or not it operates as a deterrence or what kind of a deterrence strategy. I would suggest that's probably something that's going to come, that's probably not going to come necessarily out of the organization that I am in now. Although we do think about those things, we, as you can appreciate, in a combatant command, you get very tied up into the operation of and how do we do these things. And so, you know, in the same sense that you know, the guys that were sitting alert in B-52s probably weren't like cogitating a whole lot about nuclear deterrence strategy, but somebody had to be doing it. So I think that for all those good reasons, that is a good thing for us to discuss. The other interesting thing that this teases out is the difference between a common defense, if you will, or the common defense, and private choice. And you know, the soundbite is you can do both. You can have cybersecurity at the same time that you're not impacting on personal freedoms and the like. I think that's right, but I think that just barely scratches the surface. I think that what's at work here is more of the framework in which we ought to have this discussion is one that Thomas Hobbes developed for us years ago, and I think that if we try to understand government's role in the way that the internet is going to be used, because if you think about the pervasiveness of the internet in our very lives, and as Mike said, not just the internet, but everything it touches out there, it seems to me that we have tacitly allowed the modern day Leviathan to have some purview over our individual personal freedoms. And you know, the only people, it always strikes me as interesting when I get into conversations with folks and they say to me, well, you know, but we can't have the government listening to our, you know, our reading our email. It's like, you gotta be kidding me, you got time for that? I mean, the only people that are reading your mail are translating it into Mandarin for crying out loud. So, but I think that larger discussion and what that entails, the difference between what we do publicly in order to protect and defend the net. Imagine, if you will, that something was discovered in one of our financial networks, and the overall mood of the country was, well, we can't trust that anymore. Where am I going to put my money? I mean, this country is all about making money, and I mean, it's about a lot of things, I got it, but at the end of the day, that's what we do. So if you didn't trust that you were going to get a chance, or that your money was going to be subject to the forces of the market, but it was going to be subject to the forces of something else, imagine the kind of effect that might have. So, you know, I think that, anyway, I believe that Mike is spot on with the notion of this public dialogue, and I'd like to see us expand it even more to thinking more about the way, not only the way cyber touches our lives, but how it changes the way we experience the world. And I just think that might be something useful. The very last piece is the things. One of the things that kind of keeps us awake at night, or keeps me awake at night, quite frankly, is the nation's critical infrastructure and our ability to be able to defend that. And Bill's going to, as I know, is going to talk to you about that, and we work very closely together on this. But this is an area that, you know, we're trying to define the Department of Defense's role in this. You know, what is that role specifically? And it's hard sometimes when you're inside DoD to understand how other people view us as the 600-pound gorilla that comes into the room all the time. But nonetheless, that is the case, and I can understand why when I back away from it and look at it. You know, it's like, you know, here we're here to, you know, we're pros from Dover, and we're here to fix all of this, and we've got a lot of the money and a lot of the resources. That doesn't necessarily make it right, and I think that we need to think about that. If you remember some of the things that Secretary Gates has been saying about how we need to improve the State Department, I mean, I think that thoughtful people realize that there are other ways that this government needs to be able to achieve them. So that I think is useful. The nuclear or the notion of defense, if you will, quickly gets into the commercial side of the world. Our mandate is the Department of Defense networks, and we have some very, very aggressive and very effective ways of defending the .NEL networks. That is not necessarily the case in all of the commercial world for various and sundry reasons. So one of the questions we need to start to think about and ask ourselves is what ought that relationship to be, in the same sense that as we looked at the relationship between the nuclear weapons industry and the nuclear energy industry on the civilian side years ago. One last thing here that law. I have like 8 lawyers in cybercom. I mean, you cannot swing a dead cat without hitting one, which pales in comparison to the number of lawyers they have in NSA, which we share a building with, which is larger, much larger. And I think there's probably enough here to keep everyone that is in law school now employed for the rest of their lives working on cyber law issues. The current trend is to look at this thing from a very conventional standpoint and to view cyber as cyber things, if you will, still in a geographical construct that is based on sovereignty, based on geographical sovereignty, and of nation states. And the interesting thing is, the more you understand technically about the net, it's not like there's some guy in that router down there that says, I'm going to send that packet here, and everybody's going here. We don't know where the hell they're going or how they're going to get there, and so those packets may have flown through a number of different venues before they and along with that, and the last piece, one of the practical things that I'm trying to do is to actually build a cyber COP, a common operational picture. And I still have the scars from trying to do this in the warfighting lab 10 years ago. And because I'm an eternal optimist, I refuse to give up. So we're going to do this. One of the things I'm going to try to do here is to bring these data feeds in from all of the services, the agencies, and anybody else who wants to participate. And that will be a real challenge, because as much as people talk about having visibility over what happens, in many cases, if you have your own network, you really want to have visibility over your network and somebody else's, but you're not quite so sure that you want to expose everything you do to someone else. And I think that in Cyber Command, in order for us to do this defense piece the way we need to be able to do it, that I have to have visibility over these networks. And then in turn, we build this common database, which would be shared with all of the contributors to that database, as well as, for instance, with DHS and others, so that we can put ourselves, so that when we have incidents that come up, which they will, that we would be able to use a whole government approach to it. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the board?
Absolutely. Happy to answer any. If I hesitate and stumble, it's because the little guy in the back of my head has got the TSSCI or the secret thing going across my brain. So I hopefully.
But please identify yourself, so you stand.
Sure.
Jim Giordano, Potomac Institute, great talk. So one of the things you alluded to was Hobbes, and obviously one of Hobbes' ideas was the notion of politics is also the protection of Polis.
Yeah.
Big issue comes up here with regard to how do you maintain continued protection and at the same time have sufficient transparency to be able to provide relevant privacy for the Polis, and how do you then create an infrastructure that enables public discourse and involvement, as well as that from the professional side, coupled with those individuals, quote, on the inside, who are going to be necessarily steering that in such a way that maintains the integrity of the system.
You know, I mean, you that's a great question. I mean, that is the fundamental challenge that we have. I think part of it may be that the polis or the public may begin to think differently about what it is that is private in the larger sense. I mean, if you think about the evolution, the transition that Facebook is going through, you know, I mean, initially it was everybody was putting everything out there, and it was, you know, it was one big happy family. And then as the years went on, people realized that there were some nefarious folks out there that were going to take that information out there and try to do things with So they began to put some filters, if you will. You know, it's, I don't know that I have an answer, except that it seems to me that the way, for instance, if you knew that every time you sent an email to somebody, that was public property, as opposed to your private communications, how would that change or alter what you do? And I think that is, I mean, there are some of us right now that are in positions where, quite frankly, that's the way I believe everything I do is now. I mean, I know that I'm not the only one that cares about what I write on emails and send to other people. So it's on my Nippernet BlackBerry, I just assume that is compromised. And so there's nothing but good news and smiley faces that go across that, and a whole lot of things. So, I don't know, but I mean, I think, quite frankly, you're on the fundamental issue. It's not technology. It's this issue right here. It's what does that mean to us, to the behavior? And some parts of it are cultural. I mean, if they're cultural in the United States and what we believe about individual freedoms, there are other nation states that are not all hung up on, as they see it, hung up on something that is inefficient, if you will. So, don't know, but I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of question, exactly the kind of dialogue we ought to have. In some cases, that's a more useful dialogue than it is for us to talk in specific detail about the technologies, because that's the technology in some cases allows you to get into a discussion that doesn't force you to face the hard questions that you're asking.
So I'm Pete White from Prince William Chamber of Commerce. We were active in the contract with Business Council. You talked about developing a common database, which means a lot of sharing information. You have the wiki problems that we've been going through. The reaction to that has been too much information sharing. So where do you go? And then you take that information sharing, say, across the services, but then you look at it internationally. How do we expand that?
Well, that's exactly right. And when we think about how the internet was designed to be collaborative. It was designed not to have any barriers to collaboration. And yet, we find that today, in terms of trying to defend the internet, is one of the principal weaknesses behind it. User-defined information sharing is one of the things that's kind of the philosophy, the theory that has been ongoing. It depends a lot on how you architect the networks. I think you can architect them in a way that would define your ability to access something. For example, if you architected a network that was, let's say, a secret network of some kind, but you did it in such a way that if you got into that network, you were just assumed to be a user of everything in that network. That's one way to do it. That's actually the way things started in some of our networks. Or you could architect it in such a way that you could only access certain things based on your identity. And there would be ways that identity management would be handled inside of that network when you logged on through something other than the passwords that we all keep in our top drawer of our desk so we don't forget them. So there's other ways to do that, but I think that that is ultimately going to be a challenge, and how we do it between. And I'm sure that Phil's got some better insights than I do. But between, for instance, the military and the national government, that's one level. But as you just pointed out, what about the local governments and for instance the commercial sector that's in Prince William County? And I mean, they want access to a lot of this information. They want to know how to protect their own networks. So, and they do that through a lot of commercial practices. But those commercial providers are also going to want to have access to the latest and greatest of what we know, for instance, about what the threat is. That's a good question. Sir.
John Southfield, Potomac Institute. You can blame me for the weakness of the defenses. We were going to do that later. It was hard enough to do what we did.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Charles was director of DARPA when they went off to invent the internet. He funded most of the programs that became the
I
internet.
started,
Cool.
more modestly, I started the ARPANET. In your presentation, which I liked a lot, there's a deep problem. It's in almost everything everybody says. That's the split between the defense people defending themselves and not the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's a temporary arrangement. I think it's lousy. My view is that when I pay taxes to pay for you guys, I expect you to protect me. That may be naive and
Yeah.
very old-fashioned, but it's hard to get rid of. How should we think about helping in the evolution
Mhm.
from where we are now to where we ought to be?
I think the way that discussion really needs to happen in the Congress. You know, the laws and the authorities that drive what we can or cannot do, I think is a wider whole of government kind of approach. That question actually gets asked of us fairly regularly. You know, so what's going to happen if? Well, if there is an incident, a major cyber incident of some kind, and it sort of overwhelms our initial ability to be able to deal with it, for example, and somebody says, okay, so we're going to bring in cybercom to fix this thing. Well, as you can appreciate, sort of from your background, by the time we come in to do that, it's all we're doing is cleaning up the spill in aisle 9. I mean, we don't have, you know, we need to be deeply involved before
You
that.
can't rewind the tape.
Yeah, and of course the other part of it too is that as we try to share information with some of the commercial sector, I mean, there's a very active judicial body of not just lawyers, but it starts there. I mean, you know, Shakespeare may have had it right, I don't know, but the and there are a lot of people that believe that it shouldn't be easy as we might want to make it for us to be able to share that information with some of the other folks because of the connection back to the Department of Defense. So, you know, once you open that connection up, you know, there's people that are very concerned about, well, geez, that means they could get in and, you know, and observe what's going on. So, I mean, all I can say to that is, okay, if that's the way you feel, we still have to architect a way so that we can, in fact, defend the critical infrastructure, so that when DHS is doing that, our relationship, and we've been working very, very closely together, and even more so recently, so that we are able to lend whatever we can in terms of assistance as they deal with whatever domestic event there is. But I mean, I worry about that, quite frankly, more than I do about the stuff against our networks, because we have the authorities to do what we need to do inside of the DoD networks today. We do not have the authorities to go outside of those networks to the .gov or the .com world in any way, shape, or form today. So I know that there's some interest on the Hill in having a discussion this spring about that. So that means it'll be a fairly emotional issue. Hopefully we can have a fact-informed conversation about that.
You analogized to the nuclear war. And during the 50s, we all knew we protected ourselves with bomb shelters and our root cellars and, you know, canned vegetables put aside. I'm a business owner. Heidi Jacobus from Cybernet Systems in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I have 60 employees. 2.5 of the people who work for me are full-time involved in protecting our commercial network against threats on the internet. I think it's a very little appreciated fact of how expensive it is for businesses. People who work for big companies don't see it. People who work for government don't see it. But with 60 people in my company, I see it every day. How many hundreds of thousands of threats come in and what we have to do to keep them out. I think you'd have support from your chambers of commerce. I think it's just that people don't understand how expensive it is and how it adds cost to every piece of business we do.
Well, it does, and you also understand that just pulling the plug is not an option.
Right.
You can't just say, okay, I'm just going to cut myself off from the rest of the internet and I'll deal with this problem. I mean, because, you know, in your case, that's business, and you know, so no, I do appreciate that.
Brian Moore from Northrop Grumman, and as someone from a large company, I feel your pain, and we spend a huge amount of money on the very same issue that you were just describing. But generally, I wanted to touch on another area that is of increasing interest to us. We have a great deal of capability, both in the cyber domain, our our firm, as well as in more traditional areas of electronic warfare,
Mm-hmm.
we see technology between the two converging.
Yeah.
And opportunities for both offense and defense as a result. Is this an area of interest in Cyber Command? Is that convergence, that
Well,
the Venn diagram
Yes, it's
aspect
it's an area of interest to me personally. There are some of the potential adversary countries that are out and about in the world, some of the larger ones, have actually done that, what you're suggesting. They have merged together their electronic warfare and their CNA, their network attack capabilities together. I do see that as quite frankly, as sort of a natural fit, if you will. It also raises another interesting question, which is, if you know, for many years, the standing ROE was that if there was an active electronic attack against U.S. forces, that was considered in some places to be an act of war. We've not done that with cyber attacks yet. So, but I think that there is some, and I think that even technically there are some things that those two domains might share. But, sure.
Hi, General. Ken Delaney from the LA Times. You mentioned
the
overlap between offensive and defensive operations. And I'm asking this question as a representative general reader who knows very little about this stuff. Are there any circumstances under which offensive operations would be acknowledged, would be open? And where's the line between Title 50 and Title 10? Has that been sorted out in cyberspace?
Oh boy, you're asking me a couple of hard questions here. That line is defined when the decision is made by the leadership to do something offensive, and it can be done in either one of those, under either one of those authorities. I don't think it is easy to understand the real specific difference between the two of them. I mean, in terms of trying to explain it in this venue here. So,
What about?
I know that's a bad answer.
No, I understand. But what about would offensive operations could they ever be acknowledged? Is there a circumstance under which?
Depends. I mean, it really depends. You know, if you're doing it as a traditional military activity in terms of, if you can imagine, a large kinetic warfight that we're involved in, where we allow to be attributed certain tactics and techniques and things that we're doing, I don't know. I mean, I could certainly imagine it's like, in that way, it's like a number of other weapon systems. And if you're going to employ it and use it as a weapon system or as a weighted or as a maneuver system, if you will, then it would all depend. I mean, I hate to keep going back to the all depends, but it is it's a domain, it's a capability. It's, in some cases, it's agnostic to how you use it. But in other cases, and so it would depend on the use to which you were doing those kinds of things. I mean, we've already seen examples in the open press of other countries that have done some very aggressive things in terms of cyber attacks against some of their neighbors. And sometimes that was done in conjunction with conventional military operations, and sometimes it was done just on its own.
Is there a rule book or a strategy right now that would lay out some of these scenarios under which, if this happens, then X, if that happens?
Not that I would give the LA Times. No.
If you change your mind.
Okay.
Sir, Jim Lawman from AT&T. Maybe a melodramatic question, but do you see in the next 5, 10 years your vision? Do you see a Pearl Harbor type of an event? And if so, do you see it coming from internal threats or external nation states?
It certainly is conceivable that there could be an event that would get our attention, if you will, in cyberspace. The question you're raising about whether it's internal or external, is a very good one, and it's one that I mean I'd be really hesitant to make a prediction in that regard, but what I could tell you is I think that we need to be as and we are, but we need to continue to be as sensitive to the potential for internal insider threats, if you will, as we are from other things. You know, if you look at all of the disruptions that have occurred, or all of the issues that we've had, whether it's in cyberspace or in anything else that's had to do with our national security apparatus, going back to the Rosenbergs, it's usually some kind of human behavior that causes the issues that we deal with. So, so to that extent, is it possible we could have a Pearl It's, I mean, quite frankly, just about anything is possible. We, you know, is there some kind of a cyber event that could occur that would really get our attention? Certainly could have. Now, my job, my day job, of course, is to ensure that the DoD networks are defensible and that they are being actively defended, so that that kind of an event would not transpire. Now, you know, never say never. People that do, they've written books about it later, so I'm not going to get in that category. But I don't know, but certainly something to think about it, and certainly something we need to be on our toes about keeping an eye on.
Probably time for one more question.
Tim Grayson, K-Tech Corporation, and I wanted to play a little bit off the question the gentleman asked about the cyber EW connection. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of cases where certainly in people's minds, cyber means sort of software kind of focus. Yeah. So it's viruses, firewalls, those types of things. When you look at where a lot of the potential vulnerabilities are, it starts getting down more to that physical layer. Mm-hmm. And I've just seen our government loves jurisdictions and lanes in the road and that kind of thing. Are you seeing that there's enough flexibility in the definition of cyber that it can take a look at those physical layer kind of issues as well as the software network operations level?
I don't know that I could definitively tell you that there's that kind of flexibility. I mean, two things come to mind. One of them is that we tend to deal with those things as individual entities. We tend to deal with particular incidents individually like that. I would also tell you that I think that we have seen sophistication of software now at the point where there is software that is capable of having physical effects against machines and other things. So we've seen, I think, the bridging now between software, which was traditionally looked at as just something that would disrupt and get in and corrupt other software, to where we now see software that is capable of having, for instance, we have every machine's got a BIOS in it, right? A basic input-output system that kind of controls every machine. It's not hard to imagine that if you had software that was affecting that BIOS, that BIOS could do things to not start up certain things. And let's just say, that it said, don't turn the fan on. So you're out sitting there geeking away on your computer, and all of a sudden it starts smoking you. You know what's up with that. So is it possible to do that? Yeah, I really think there is. So I mean, it's a good question, and it's a good place for us to be looking. But I think that we clearly are starting to bridge what we traditionally saw as the realm of software unique to where software can have almost kinetic kinds of effects in the physical world.
General, I'd like to give you a small token of Potomac Institute.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I really
Thank you very
appreciate you
much.
coming back to the Institute and sharing with me your thoughts. Please join me in thanking the
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on with our next speaker, who is, I'm very proud to say, a senior fellow at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. Ambassador David Smith is also a senior fellow at the Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies and a director of the Georgian Security Analysis Center in Tbilisi. I think Ambassador Dave has had about 3 careers since I've known him. He's been deeply involved in the strategic world that I mentioned a bit ago. He was nominated by George H.W. Bush to lead the U.S. defense and space talks, and he headed the team negotiating with the Soviet Union up until they went away. So I don't know whether his negotiation was that good or he talked him out of being an adversary, I guess. They couldn't stand it. So he has a very distinguished career working in the strategic issues of ballistic missiles, space, and nuclear weapons. Prior to that, he actually had a long career, a very distinguished career, if not a really ultimately long career, in on Capitol Hill, where he was the chief of staff for Congressman John Kyle. He was in charge of strategic policy and arms control for the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He particularly supported the Majority Leader, Senator Bob Dole, and was well known on Capitol Hill as one of the go-to guys for all things dealing with strategic issues. And he's also been a very eminent scholar over the years, writer, publicist. He's published many books and articles. He writes a regular article that's republished on the Potomac Institute site whenever you'll let us. And so it's with pride that I mentioned that a member of the Potomac Institute is with us today to talk about the issues surrounding strategic cyber policy in the world. Ambassador Dave Smith.
Mike, thank you very much for the altogether too kind words. Thanks to you and to my other colleagues here at Potomac for setting this thing up and inviting me to be among the first speakers at our first event here. I think we also need to say something else too. Somebody had to put all this stuff together, and it wouldn't have been done without retired General David Reist, who's responsible for doing all of this. He's probably left the room now. So can I go on and say, well, let me tell you what I think about Reist. Anyway, he certainly proves the adage, if you didn't know, if you want to get something done, give it to a Marine and it will get done. So when he comes in, somebody please tell him I thanked him for putting this thing together. As Mike pointed out, and I guess I came originally from what we used to call the strategic world, because the nuclear mafia basically hijacked the word strategic, and for a generation, big nuclear things were called strategic things, and everything else was everything else. The word actually has a 3,000-year history and should not be used that way, but nonetheless, there we are. I think my participation today, Mike mentioned I'm also the director of the Georgian Security Analysis Center. Georgia is the one place that has been attacked in cyber world in conjunction with a kinetic attack. There's a lot to learn there, and I hope as this program goes on that I'll be able to share some of those things with you. By the way, we also have with us today the former Chief of Staff of the Georgian Armed Forces with us in the audience. So, General Bhaiyya, thank you for coming. But today I've been asked to take a look at sort of the analogy between developing a policy, a strategy for nuclear weapons, and what we're going through now, some of the issues that came up when General Schmidle was speaking about developing a strategy and a policy for the cyber world. I made an offhanded comment once. I think somebody was bemoaning that we're having trouble with legislation, and we have armies of lawyers, and we don't have the right laws for this and that, and we still don't have a policy, and all of the recommendations of the cyber policy review aren't being implemented as quickly as we would like. And I think at the time there was not yet a cyber coordinator appointed, and so on. I said, well, yeah, that's all terrible, and I don't mean we shouldn't fix those things, but you kind of have to go through that with something new, and in fact we did. Now, we're all used to going to conferences about nuclear stuff where people talk about what is stability, crisis stability, arms race stability, what is the relative stabilizing factor of having single warhead missiles versus multiple warhead missiles, mobile missiles versus stationary missiles, having a triad, not having a triad, as if this is all sort of was somewhere chiseled in stone. Well, maybe it's chiseled in stone now, but the chiseling was very, very hard. It wasn't always so.
It was ugly.
It was ugly, all right. Charles Hertzfeld, of course, was there at the creation, so he could, when I tell you it was ugly, he can tell you it was even uglier, and he can give you some color commentary. I'm going to try and give you sort of the white side of this, though. I can't go through everything, but I'm going to start on July 16th, 1939, and I'm going to end on October 30th, 1953. Roughly what I would say sort of the very beginnings of the Manhattan Project, and when we actually had a policy that you could hold up and say, this is it. We have a policy. It'll change. It'll be reviewed, but we got something here. It's an interesting thing. By the way, this is a great book if you're interested in this. It's long, but it's really the making of the atomic bomb. This is just a description of the very beginning. Here we have Eugene Wigner and Leo Szilard going out looking for Albert Einstein. Sunday, July 16th, driving out to Potomac on Long Island. They reached the area in the afternoon, but had no luck soliciting directions to the house until Szilard thought to ask for it by Einstein's name. We were on the point of giving up and going back to New York, he said, when I saw a boy, maybe 7 or 8, standing on the curb. I said, say, do you by any chance know where Professor Einstein lives? The boy knew that, and he offered to take us there. That's sort of the beginning of the nuclear age. I mean, kind of in jest, but I think it's a kind of a neat sort of symbol of how things started. A couple of Hungarian guys driving out the nether end of Long Island looking for what was apparently a quite secluded place where Albert Einstein was spending his summers. And I'll end up with NSC Policy 162-2 in 1953. Now, I'm not going to go through the technical developments. Let's just leave it there. We developed nuclear weapons. The point I want to make here is I've got 3 objectives in going through this. First of all, it took us 14 years from that day on Long Island to the point where we could say, we've got it, there's something here. That's a fair amount of time, and we went through a lot of history in those 14 years, from 1939 to 1953. Secondly, I want to go through the factors that shaped, in fact, forced the policy. You can't just do this and say we need a policy, and then you get one. There's a lot more to it. And then I want to go through the similarities and dissimilarities between the way I see the evolution of nuclear strategy and, well, the attempted or ongoing evolution of cyber strategy. You have to, people say history repeats itself. No, it doesn't. History never repeats itself. Some of the factors do. And if you don't look at similarities and dissimilarities, you then learn the lessons from that, you really do run that risk. George Santayana said, those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. You got to learn the lessons. You can't just look for the same pattern. There's stuff that's the same and there's stuff that's not. Well, there we were in World War II. How's that for a beginning? There we were in World War II. We had an issue, and it was not the kind of issue that forces a coherent policy. We had won the war. We needed a surrender from Japan. That's where we were. It was over. By any objective standard, it was over. They weren't surrendered. We had just been through in the fall of 1944 on Peleliu, and then in the spring of 1945, Iwo Jima. It was nasty. It was ugly. We took a lot of casualties, and we were planning for the invasion of Japan. There was actually some thought about using this weapon in a tactical sense to aid the invasion of Japan, which was exactly what we didn't want to do. That was the dilemma. I've got a great picture. We agreed not to use PowerPoint on this one, but there's a great picture of the back of the Enola Gay, 4 or 5 guys there, big bomb, and one guy in his shorts, no shirt, boots and shorts, with his back up against the bulkhead, literally pushing the thing out the back. Another great image, I think, for what the policy was. We needed a thing to go boom. We pushed it out of the back of the airplane, it went boom. That was the policy that we had. What it really did, though, from a policy point of view, is it confirmed the 15-year-old doctrine of strategic bombardment. basically the people who were pushing strategic bombardment said, you see, you really whack them in a big way on a city, that'll do it. Once again, it kind of put off the making of really coherent, cogent policy by the obvious, see, we made a boom, it went boom, they surrendered. Now, there were a variety of studies, and when you run through this as quickly as I have to run through it today, you always get somebody who puts up their hand and says, what about the SPATS report? So if somebody wants to put up their hand and say, what about the SPATS report, I'm prepared to go with you on that one. So find a different one that you may find me, trick me on there. We know there were a variety of studies, mostly in the newly independent Air Force, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We know President Truman didn't like nuclear weapons. It was just visceral. I don't like the things, was one of his quotes. Berlin crisis in 1948. We had to think about, what is this thing? Will we use it? Not totally dissimilar from the kind of discussion we're having now. Okay, we got this thing. I know how to do really bad things with it. Are we going to do those things? Is this a special thing that we only use under the duress of really dire circumstances? Or is this a weapon like any other? We didn't really know when we got into the Berlin crisis of 1948. The then Secretary of Defense, Mr. Forrestal, actually sent a memo to President Truman and said, I got to know if this is something to do our planning. I got to know whether this is something we're going to use or not. Is this, I got them. I know what to do with it, but I can't do any real job of planning, of strategizing for this thing unless you tell me whether this is one of the things I can use. Is this something we're allowed to do? Or is this something that we push to the survival of the nation type of thing? That forced a consideration in the National Security Council. And guess what? There was a National Security Council decision in September of 1948 that said, no, Mr. Secretary, you're wrong. We don't need a policy on that. The National Security Council actually said, no, we don't. We don't need to decide on that. So we still didn't know what was the status of these things that we had. NSC 68, the famous beginning of the Cold War document, 1950, was, I would still call on the nuclear side, a proto-policy. It did put in place one thing, the assumption that there would be a mutual calculation of risk on both sides, which is something that permeated the entire thinking for decades on nuclear issues. But that was about it. It said some other things, but then boom, Korean War. Well, are you going to use them or not? We came out, we had it again, and a lot of those discussions you've read about, MacArthur saying we ought to nuke the Chinese, so on and so forth, there was a lot beneath the surface. That wasn't just MacArthur being rude and crude and in conflict with the President of the United States. There was a serious issue there that was yet unresolved. Should we use these things as regular military weapons or not? Truman left office, we still didn't have a policy. It took the Eisenhower administration about a year to get to October 1953, where we had NSC 162-2. This set out the need for the capability for massive retaliation. It also set out the concept of flexible response, even though that's not well known because of the name that was given to this whole policy, massive retaliation. It was not, it's not widely known, but if you actually read it, it's pretty explicit that it needed to be something that was pretty flexible depending on what was going on. Forward defense, including allies. A mobilization base to guard against damage. The understanding that we were probably going to get whacked too, and we needed to be prepared for that. A declaratory policy that included nuclear weapons. Didn't say we would, this is another misnomer about massive retaliation. It didn't say we will massively retaliate. It said, you understand we have the capability, and we see nuclear weapons as one of the things we could use. It took 14 years to get to that point. So what were those factors that shaped this? The point I want to make here to you is this. We didn't get a policy because we needed one, because some smart people thought we should have one, and because a bunch of people sat around in a room. There were a set of forcing events, and as I pointed out to you a few minutes ago, World War II wasn't one of them. World War II simply extended thinking from the 1930s about nuclear weapons. One of them was the institutionalization of the United States Air Force. For better or for worse, the wrangling to create a separate service actually contributed to the policy. Production. Gotta have something. When we were talking about it in the 40s, there was a dirty little secret. We didn't have any more of them. It was a very theoretical discussion. We had better production of weapons, and we had production of longer range bombers. Longer range bombers, not long range bombers. The Cold War gave you a political set of parameters to consider how this might come about. Soviet conventional superiority. We had to deal with the fact that they had the landmass of Europe covered with conventional forces, and we had these things. How were we going to use them? That forced the consideration. Then there was the Soviet nuclear weapon explosion in 1949. A very public debate on the so-called the hydrogen weapon in 1949. A lot of budget pressure, and then the Korean War. And note, because of the conversation we had with General Schmidle, what I said about the level of public visibility and debate. And he was asking the rhetorical question, can you have a debate about cyber in the public? And I think the answer is unequivocally yes, you can. Obviously, you're not talking about the deep, dark secrets. Obviously, you're not putting out certain plans. Obviously, you're not telling people how you're exactly defending this against that. You can have a theoretical debate about what kinds of things you will do, what kind of susceptibilities you have, what your declaratory policy is. You can, and I would argue to you, you must, or you will never have the political chips and the budgets to do the things that you need to do. So you need the institutionalization, you need technical developments, you need domestic political pressure, you need budget pressure, you need foreign political events, and you need that public debate. Let me just go through some of the things that I see as being similar and some of the things being dissimilar from the experience we went through with developing nuclear weapons policy to what we're undergoing now. Recall when we talk about the things that are dissimilar, that there's several levels of this. I will argue to you that there's a lot similar in the intellectual and institutional process that we have to go through. To get down into the details, of course they're different. You've got to be very careful you don't fall into that great adage of President Eisenhower. Things are more like they are today than they have ever been before. Think about it. You cannot refute that statement. You can't. Okay, similar. Legacy thinking. You talk about legacy systems, there's also legacy thinking. We couldn't get away from the argument that the bomber will always get through that was made back in 1932. It went right through World War II, it went right into the nuclear age, and we have that today. We have the concept of geographical, General was talking about geographical sovereignty, we have geographical terms, balance, strategic balance, deterrence, offense, defense. These are all terms that are really borrowed from another era. We've got to deal with those things. That doesn't mean to throw them out, but you got to understand that that's legacy thinking. There is a sense that any kind of restraint will probably be blown. Blown in the case of bombardment in the Battle of Britain. My guess is, if we're thinking smart, any constraint we think any enemy, any adversary of the United States, when the chips are down, is going to have, is probably not going to hold. I think we need to assume they're going to come at us with anything they got. A sense that this is all very important, but also a sense of uncertainty about exactly how we're going to deploy it and use it and what the circumstances will be. We didn't know literally until the springtime of 1945 what we were going to do with that nuclear weapon. The institutional and budgetary battles, for better or for worse, are there. You got to deal with them, and they actually help you develop your policy. That's a similarity. Before it was the nascent United States Air Force, look at all the things we've been through in the birth of Cyber Command. Just take that one example alone about the internecine warfare that we had with the institutionalization there. A sense that an open and democratic society, in some cases, is at a disadvantage. I'd like to debate that one, but there is a sense, because I don't think we are. I think in the long run, you're probably at an advantage. But in the short term, when time is short, it's harder to make tough decisions in a democracy, in an open society, than it is in a dictatorship. There's no controls. With all due respect to Bruce Schneier, who wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about need for basically arms control treaties on this stuff. Somebody who's come from the treaty business for most of my life, don't count on that, folks. You're on your own. A sense of compressed time. You're going to have to go with what you've got. And very important, very similar, the vulnerability of civilian infrastructure. For the first time in the nuclear era, we were talking about cities going down. That's what we're talking about now. In a different way, but it's still cities, dissimilar. Back then, the context was obvious. We were fighting World War II, we were fighting the Korean War, we had the Cold War, we were worried about an attack from the Soviet Union. We understood what the context was. This time, we decided we may not know what's just happened, where this is coming from, why this is happening. It may be the precursor, it may be the warning. So that context, the geopolitical context in which this could come at you. Now, let me go back to Georgia's experience for a moment. You look at the Georgian experience, we know exactly what the context was. We knew exactly where it was coming from, and again, it was coming from the Russian government. And it was very obvious what was going on there. But you may not get that. So that's a dissimilarity. Secondly, the dollar calculation is inverted. Back then, we were doing the calculation that, wow, versus maintaining division after division after division of conventional forces, nuclear weapons are a deal. General Hap Arnold actually did a calculation. He said it was 6-to-1. Lord knows how he came up with that. But 6-to-1 advantage, nuclear weapons versus maintaining conventional forces. Now, it's inverted. The price advantage is out there with the little guy. A handful of hackers, a handful of computers. I mean, it's not nothing, but you know, it's not. We're not talking about a heck of a lot of money here for somebody to create a capability that could actually damage the United States of America. Third one. Then we assumed we couldn't defend against nuclear weapons. I think that was a bad assumption, but that was the mainstream view. And therefore, the only defense was retaliation. Now, you actually can defend. There's some issues here that the general raised of how you're doing that defense and do you have the authority to do something, but you can defend. Retaliation may be in a greater question. That's something I think that we need to work through with this policy discussion. An attack on cities or civilian infrastructure, as we now call it. Back then, it only made sense if it would be decisive. If you're going to attack another country and it's real clear that it's you doing the attacking, you don't go after something that isn't decisive without going after the military forces. Because if you don't destroy the military forces, then they're going to come back at you. So unless that attack on a city is really going to whack them, put them out of business, you'd actually be smarter to go after the military forces. Not necessarily so today. It may well make sense to attack civilian infrastructure, either as a standalone or in conjunction with a kinetic attack. It may actually make sense as your precursor. Then there's the three biggest differences. I've alluded to the one. It's the problem of attribution. Back in the beginning of the nuclear era, when you had an airplane, remember we didn't even have ballistic missiles yet. We were talking about an airplane sort of lumbering across the sky. You knew where it came from, and there's only a limited number of countries that could actually fly an airplane that didn't do any kind of damage with you. Attribution is a major issue that changes a lot of at least the detailed calculation. Secondly, there is a reversal of this public and private. Most of what we were trying to defend back then was a military thing. Now you've got this issue where a lot of what you're defending is in private hands, should be in private hands, but you can attack a nation, as we found out in Georgia. The Russians attacked banks, television stations, mobile phone companies to attack Georgia, not to attack the mobile phone company, to attack the country of Georgia. And then finally, visibility. We had big stuff going on. First of all, we had a massive demonstration at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We had the experience of World War II. We had the Berlin crisis. We had a Soviet nuclear explosion. We had the Korean War. One of my colleagues has just written a chapter on Russian cyber capabilities for a book that's being published in Georgia. And she pointed out, we have this terrible picture from the Georgian War of a woman in front of her apartment building burning. She's like this, there's airplanes above her, and her dead husband is right next to her. It's seared on the minds of everybody who lived through that war, myself included. How do you show that same poignant picture of the ATMs not working? The cell phones not working. You can really whack a country by bringing its financial, but sort of showing people exasperated, sitting before their computers, doesn't have the same emotional effect. So you need some kind of visibility. We have to have a public debate. And I come back to that point. This big similarity here is that the intellectual and institutional process of developing a policy is very, very much the same. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. We save the questions until after our final speaker has spoken. We are privileged to have with us the Deputy Undersecretary of Homeland Security. And those of you who have been around this issue and around Washington, D.C. for any time at all know that at least on this issue, actually on most issues, the whipping boy is Homeland Security. That's their problem. Homeland Security, they either don't have their act together, or they don't have the expertise to do it, or there's too many offices and we can't figure out who's in charge. Well, Phil is a perfect argument to every single one of those criticisms. At Homeland Security, there are a couple offices that look over these issues: the National Protection and Programs Directorate, the Visitor and Immigration Status Indicator Technology Organization, U.S. Visit, and of course the National Cybersecurity Center, NCSC. All of these organizations report to this one gentleman, and he coordinates all of the issues surrounding cyber for our Homeland Security Department. The people that criticize him usually say, well, they didn't understand all of the DoD and the warfighting issues. They didn't understand all of the legal and the Justice Department issues, all of this. Before going to Homeland Security, Phil was executive director of the U.S. Department of Defense's Cyber Crime Center, and before that, he was the deputy in charge, deputy chief of the Cyber Crimes and Intellectual Property section at U.S. Department of Justice. So he served in both Justice and DoD, and to top that off, he's a man that I really respect. So I'm not just blowing it out here. I think it's really important to note, as you heard from my introduction, this is an issue where technology is intersecting not just with society, but with our legal structure. The most perfect person to deal with this would be a person with a great background in law and technology. Phil has a degree from Yale, a law degree from Yale, and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from Vanderbilt University. Absolutely, I think one of the most perfectly placed and hardest working public servants we have working on this issue. It's my privilege to introduce Deputy Undersecretary Phil Reitinger.
Now I'm looking for the incoming. So a few weeks ago, I got an email from retired General Reese, Dave, that said, we'd like you to come and talk to the Potomac Policy Institute. He said, sounds like a great forum, I'd love to do it. Obviously, I've had a chance to work with General Schmidle, and good chance to meet now Ambassador Smith. So it seemed great. The proposal was to talk about where are we now on cyber policy. I said, great, that sounds wonderful. I didn't really start to think about it until last week. And Mike will tell you, I sent an email like, what the heck do you want me to talk about? Because I've been in this game. I mean, I've been a cyber geek, effectively, a policy geek and a cyber geek, ever since I graduated from engineering school. I graduated in '84, 26 years, 27 years almost. And I've been doing cyber policy in DC for private sector or government for about 15 years. And I can talk on about 20 different subjects, and where are we now on cyber policy? And because I'm both an engineer and a lawyer, I can bore any of you to tears. So I thought about, what do I actually want to say? Given this is the Policy Institute, what do you actually want to hear about? So I decided what I wanted to talk about today was really sort of one thing that a lot of things roll up to. The answer I want to leave, or the point I want to leave with you today, is no Ruby slippers. Right? If anybody in this space tells you that they've got a solution for you and it's going to work, all you have to do is install it on your network. Or they say that X entity, whether it be a government entity or a private sector entity, is going to solve all of your problems, then they're asking you to put on a pair of Ruby slippers. There is no solution here but a long, hard slog, to use the terms of our former Secretary of Defense. This is hard, it is difficult, and it is going to take a course of years. So if you want any of those, if you're willing to buy those things, then I've got a bridge in Brooklyn that I would like to sell you. Let's start with where we are right now. First, although I make fun of the question, it's actually the right question in terms of where are we now in cyber policy. It's the right question because one, it says where are we now, and I hope it doesn't presume that we're ever going to get to an endpoint. Right? It's an old saw in cyber that cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. And okay, yes, that's true, but it actually is real, right? Even in policy, we're going to need to continue to be an environment where policy will evolve, not a need to evolve as much as it does right now, but we'll need to continue to evolve with what we are doing. Second, it's right to ask the question about policy, because although there are huge technological issues here, the most difficult, I would say without exception, happy to argue that, the most difficult without exception are the policy issues. It is policy that we really have to fight through to be able to work out the right solutions in this space. So I'd like to start with a little bit with what I see about the current environment, what I see as the attributes that we need in a policy ecosystem, and then what are some of the elements of progress we've gotten so far, recognizing that we're not all the places that we need to be yet. So where are we right now? Well, if you didn't take this from what General Schmidle said and what Ambassador Smith said, right now, on the internet, offense wins. Full stop. Somebody wants to break into your systems, and they're willing to devote a sufficient amount of time and resources to do it, they're going to get in. And if you don't want them to, disconnect from the network, turn off your computer, and don't let anybody use it or near it. And if you really want it to be secure, as I like to say, you've probably heard me say this before, open up the computer, pull out the hard drive, hit it with a hammer until the data cannot be pulled off it forensically. As our small business owner pointed out, securing yourself. I mean, what we need to get to is an environment where it's possible to secure yourself in an economically reasonable way. And it's just not possible right now. You can do things. You can mitigate risk. You have to do things. But we're not to the place where in the cyber world, in the virtual world, it's as transparent or easy or inexpensive as it is in the physical world. Okay? Second point on that. That is not sustainable. No ifs, ands, or buts. It is not sustainable. We had the question over here before about physical and cyber. They're completely interconnected now. I mean, it's not just things like control systems and that we've got cyber and our dams and our power plants and our phone networks, although we do, and all those things depend upon cyber. It's increasingly our refrigerators and our phones and our TVs. A high-end TV now isn't made without an IP stack on it. If you guys know what that means. There's an internet connection there for updating and for pulling down data. Lord forbid there's a vulnerability there, as there probably is. And we're networking our refrigerators so they can be usable. And if we want that sort of the picture that's going to get people, at least capture the popular imagination, maybe it's just a cartoon. Remember, everybody remembers on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, or actually my favorite one is another New Yorker one that says, it's one dog talking to another. He says, "I'm sure you are who you say you are, but security regulations require that I sniff your butt." Excuse me. I shouldn't have said that on the web. But it's a really great ad. Maybe they'll bleep that for me. It's a cartoon where it's a refrigerator that's got a bulb that says, "I'm sorry, I've been shut down by a botnet of televisions that has been assembled." Or help, the toaster is attacking. Right? that's the environment that we're going to face in the future unless we can get out of this. I'll tell you one thing that I'm not going to talk about today is we got to change the fundamental security of the ecosystem. And we've got to change the fundamentals of the internet so it's more fundamentally secure from the ground up. I'll just tell you at least 4 things that I think are necessary. More secure components, greater use of strong privacy-enhancing authentication, use of automation and interoperability broadly, so we're able to have a set of devices and people that can react to the internet speed in an automatic way, and so the only barriers to collaboration are those we impose by policy, as opposed to imposed on us by technology. We will impose barriers to collaboration based on policy, but we should choose to do that. People should make decisions, not technology. So that's one thing we need. But let's spill over to what today is about, which is the policy ecosystem. So I'm gonna actually think in space a little bit today, because I was outlining today. I said, what if I were designing a policy ecosystem? What would its key attributes be? And I throw these out there for your consideration, recognizing that some of them are inadequately considered. But I do believe that we could talk about this in an unclassified way. I do believe we have to talk about this in an unclassified way, and there needs to be a public dialogue about what needs to happen. So I would say, and I'll go through each of these things, we need a policy framework that allows distributed, agile, aligned, effective action. And I'll go through each of those adjectives and action fairly quickly. Distributed. If anybody tells you, as I said before, there's a top-down solution here, there isn't. That doesn't mean we're not going to have requirements, and we don't need government action in places, but it means that we're dealing with a security situation and an ecosystem that cuts across the private sector and the public sector. It cuts across international borders, and it cuts across government agencies. So we actually, to be able to work in this environment, need to bring, within the United States, all national capabilities to bear. Silos are right out. Got to stop thinking less about, well, how are DHS and DOD going to work together? They have different cultures. No, we got to work together. There's no question about that. We've got to bring those multiple capabilities to bear. We've got to do it between the public and private sectors, and we've got to do it internationally. The internet is itself distributed. Solutions that do not allow and enable and support distributed action will not be successful. Second, agile. A couple of different factors there. One, threats evolve at internet speed. We have to be able to respond to internet speed. It's another old saw that the policy ecosystem never keeps up with technology. That's true. When the automobile was invented, law about how to address the automobile came far behind it. But what's different here is technology is evolving at an exponentially faster rate than it did before. We simply have to find ways to have policy at the right level that allows for agile responses across the ecosystem and agile development of law and policy. We're still working, back when I was particularly in the Justice Department, I was pretty involved in doing things like updating cybercrime laws. We did it every few years. Some of the laws that we're working with in this space go back to 1934 and haven't been substantially amended since then. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not, but we got to have a discussion about this. We have to have a discussion about how we all keep this policy system up to date so that we have both policy and technical responses that stay agile. The next piece is aligned, right? Distributed activity is not effective unless it's aligned. We have to work together towards the same ends. Moreover, we have a degree of interdependency that requires aligned action. You can have the most secure network in the world, absolutely the most secure network in the world, and it doesn't do you a whit of good. If one of the key service providers that, for anything, power, phone, whatever you've got, isn't secure. It doesn't do you a whit of good if somebody can assemble a botnet and shut down your ability to access the internet, regardless of what protections you've created. So we absolutely have to have the right mechanisms to address that, to drive aligned action. And I would tell you that we need, apropos of some of the earlier discussions we've had, clear roles and responsibilities. We've made significant progress there, but there's a lot of work to be done. Lack of clarity is disabling in this space. Rooster made the joke before about, you can't swing a dead cat and not hit a lawyer. I don't know why the cat needs to be dead, but we all, we all get this. There's too much ambiguity, right? If Rooster and I want to talk together, we need more clarity about what we can do and can't do. I need to know how I can work more effectively with the private sector. Lawyers are great. Lawyers help us. I'm a recovering lawyer. I'm on step 5 of the 12-step system. But we've got to be able to have clarity around that. Effectiveness. We have to drive outcomes in the policy ecosystem. And we aren't able to do that as effectively as we can right now either, for a bunch of reasons. Part of it deals with this distributed ecosystem, and different people have incentives. And the people who can actually fix the problem may not have the incentives to do it. In fact, they may be legally barred from doing it in some cases. So we've got to work through that. And more deeply, and this goes to some of the discussion we had before, I think it was Jim in the back who talked about privacy. Sometimes we don't have agreement on what the outcomes we want are. Right? It's kind of hard to say we're all working for the same end until we as a country agree what that end is. And there's a big conflict between security and privacy in some cases. In a lot of ways, they go together. There's conflicts and disagreements between governments, so we have to drive what that is. And the last piece here that I would suggest that we do, it's got to be focused on action. There needs to be a no navel-gazing rule. So admiring the problem is great. We've all been moving forward for 15 years, but we in DHS, the folks in DOD, people in the private sector are all focused on how we implement this, how we action it. And we are all looking forward very strongly towards the ongoing public discussion about how we build that framework. What are the roles and responsibilities? What do you all want to hold government accountable for? And who in government do you want to hold accountable for that? Right? Because right now, like for example, we at DHS are responsible for a lot of things, but you can argue whether we've got the authorities to accomplish it or not. But we decide what you want government to do, who in government ought to do it, and what are the authorities that they ought to be able to bring to bear to solve it. So now I've talked about the problem for a while. I'm going to briefly talk about some of the progress that's been made. Because I think a lot of progress has been made. I don't want to be Pollyanna. Let's talk about a few priorities. We are clearly viewing this as a priority circumstance. Not only did the President of the United States, when he came into office, launch a cyberspace policy review, and actually give a speech solely on cybersecurity. Who would have thought that 10 years ago? If you think back to about this time last year, I think it was February 1st of last year, Rooster made jokes about the Quadrennial Defense Review. Right? The Quadrennial Defense Review and the Quadrennial Homeland Security Review were literally released on the same day. And read both of them with regard to cyber. And you will see a parallel and reinforcing approach between those two documents. DOD said cyber is a key mission area for us, growing in importance. And DHS, speaking on behalf of the Homeland Security community, which is much broader than DHS, said cybersecurity is one of the top 5 mission areas. That is one of the 5 mission areas for the Homeland Security enterprise, on a par with domestic security, immigration, enforcing immigration laws, policing our borders, and resiliency to disasters. Cybersecurity as important as those things. So that's a huge first step. Work on roles and responsibilities. In a bipartisan way, from the past administration into this administration, there has been continual progress on defining capabilities and roles and responsibilities, growing from the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative into the work under the Cyberspace Policy Review and all of the work that's taking place now under the leadership of Howard Schmidle at the White House. Operational plans. part of the outcome of the cyberspace policy review was the development of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, which is the first truly national plan for how we will respond as one nation to a significant cyber incident involving all of the entities across government and the private sector, and was developed very differently from how government normally operates. The private sector was at the table from the very start and was deeply involved in that plan. And we are continuing to move forward and iterate on that. Alignment and action. So if you think this issue is not getting importance in government, go back and read the stories or pull up from our website the MOA that DHS and DoD signed in the fall of last year on how we are going to collaborate. An initiative, that MOA is signed literally at the secretarial level and was driven at the secretarial level. We understand that between DoD and DHS, we're two of the key players in this space, and we need to collaborate. So we have deployed an element at Cyber Command and NSA to work effectively with DoD, to liaise, to work with them on technology, to understand what they're seeing about the threat. And both Cybercom and NSA are deploying elements to our organization, the National Cybersecurity and Coordination, Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, to support our activities. We are committed to joint planning, joint work, and mutually supporting one another under a framework that enhances security and privacy. I could talk about there's a bunch of other work. Recently, one other element, the President, through Howard Schmidt and Secretary Locke of the Commerce Department, announced the NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. So I mentioned before about authentication, significant progress to move forward on how we are going to drive broader authentication. Lots of things. In short, I think the review is, if you've ever seen an audit, a GAO audit or otherwise, the best you ever get out of them is significant work done, or progress, significant work remains, right? So that's where we are. There's been great progress, but significant work remains. We absolutely, though, have to get to an environment that is fundamentally more secure. We have to change the game. It's got to be easier on small business, large business, and government agency alike to work effectively together. We've got to make sure that the level of security we can get on the internet is reflective of the fact that it is primarily a civilian space. No cut on DoD. DoD has huge capabilities, but the internet's like the physical world. We do everything there. We watch videos, we communicate. It has to be usable as a civilian space and give us the level of security, integrity, and confidentiality that we've come to expect in the physical world. People and companies have got to be able to make the decision whether to put bars on their doors or windows or not, and what that looks like, what protections to do. We've got to have a clear understanding of what the roles and responsibilities are. We've got to move forward. So I talked a little longer than I intended to, but that's kind of where I am, where I'm coming from. We are very focused in DHS on implementation. I'm partnering with the private sector, DoD, and our other key government partners. This is not about silos. This is not about jurisdiction. This is about working together across the enterprise to solve the problems that we face.
Thank you. Questions from the field or comments in the form of questions from the field? Please identify yourself. You start. Good.
Keith May, Government Mass Networks. You talked about working with the private sector. There's quite a few of us, probably a lot in the audience here, that have good ideas about how to solve some problems. And I was wondering if you could tell me, does DHS have a touch point or an outreach program, like where we could go and discuss those types of things?
Absolutely, and we've got multiple channels. So, I mean, first off, feel free to send me an email, and I may delegate it down to someone in my org, depending, but I work closely with people across the private sector. We work very closely with the private sector in a number of different fora, including under the, I hate to throw acronyms out, the NIP framework, right? So the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. So that involves work with all of the major sectors through the sector coordinating councils, in partnership with the different government agencies that are in charge of those sector coordinating councils for each of the sectors, and broadly through the cross-sector cybersecurity working group. one of those great acronyms, the CSWG. A lot of C's, S's, and N's in this space. But we participate in conferences. Love to hear your ideas. So absolutely happy to talk with you.
Sir, Jim Lodging from AT&T, really gentlemen, I'm not sure we want to field this one. You all touched on one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, which is individual responsibility. What I'm getting at is when it comes to writing policy, maybe it's something offensive, defensive, something like what we're talking about today. I think it's very tough to move cybersecurity forward if we don't get the American people to kind of have a stake in this. And we can talk about ATM shutting down, and that may be enough, or cell phones shutting down. That'll definitely do it. Get people irritated. But back in the 30s, when we were pursuing this atomic bomb thing, you got robbed. You lost your wallet. You lost maybe the safe in your house. You're out of luck. Today, the American people, somebody steals something through them cyberly, they are not rewarded, but they're compensated by their own banks and credit unions. What would you think about a policy that basically put a little more responsibility on individuals, where they don't, they get robbed? And maybe it's because, as Rooster put it, they have their passwords in their desk, not taking it as serious. I'm just thinking, if I got robbed, my ID was stolen, maybe I would have a bigger, stake in this fight. Care to comment?
I'm happy to do it, but I've been talking for a while.
Well, I mean, you're raising the sort of the crime and the terrorism and the war issue all together, and I think you have to, even though it's hard to draw those lines, there are some in there in your question. Yeah, look, I mean, on the crime thing, somebody steals money from you, you're absolutely right. We've gotten to a point where, and by the way, your bank's not compensating you. What's happening is they're charging those fees so that we're all paying them, and they're building it into the price of whatever your loss may be. And it seems to me we probably do need to get to a point where, like your car, did you have your car locked? Did you have the keys in the ignition? No guarantee that somebody can't steal your car, but you're really asking for it if you leave your car open, the door open, and the keys in the ignition. And there's certain things you could do. Do you have an internet security system on your computer? Do you give your, how did this happen? I mean, we probably need to get to that sort of thing. But on the national, and by the way, there's a great book out on personal responsibility across the board in America, not just on this stuff, on how this is change in our culture. On the sort of public-private thing, we've always had a situation. It's not like in World War II that the railroads and the ports and whatnot weren't owned by private business, and it was a matter of degree. But we always expected the port owner to do certain things. You have to have a fence. You have to have dogs. You have to feed the dogs. You have to have lighting. There were certain things that you did because you were part of a national infrastructure that is different from the poodle parlor on Main Street that probably is not crucial to the survival of the republic. And it seems to me that what you have now, though, is a matter of degree. This lady's talking about a major, just for her relatively small business, a major investment in cybersecurity, basically. And Northrop Grumman left, I think, but there you're talking about, we're talking billions of money that they have spent. It seems to me you got two issues. One is, I think Charles made the point of, I have an army out there. Let's just get it down to, here they come. And one of the reasons I pay my taxes is if they're going to go and drop a bomb on me and the Air Force has the ability to shoot them down, I would really appreciate it if they would do it, please, even though they're not attacking a military facility. If they're just attacking me, I would really appreciate it if you guys would, do something about that. So there's the protection of infrastructure in that sense. But then there's another step in this issue, and that is the point that I made earlier about where we have an example from Georgia. Let's say you are a totally, what me worry, I don't care about my own property or even my own life. I don't care, it's my own business. And if somebody drops a bomb on me, they drop a bomb on me. If they destroy my little factory or my little store or whatever, I don't care. That's unlike people. Just take it for a hypothetical for a minute. You may still be part of a critical national infrastructure in which we all have an interest. You can't just say, I'm not going to do it. And it seems to me there's where we really have this legal issue. Some people will comply voluntarily, but at some point it's going to come down to money. Who is critical infrastructure? How do we define a critical infrastructure? What does the government do and pay for? What do you have to do and pay for? But there's precedents for this. We just have to work through them. But it seems to me that the crucial issue here is to take, like I said, to take from the Georgian example. This is not movies. This is not Live Free or Die Hard. This is real. Private businesses were attacked to attack a nation. And though I have no stock in the mobile phone company, the television station, or that particular bank, I still have an interest in those things being protected.
So I'd say three
Can I
brief
talk
things.
long enough?
Oh, three brief things. Part of this is a question of time and awareness, right? We're in the place where we have people using the technology who didn't grow up with the technology. So it's like the automobiles are out and people are starting to drive, but they didn't see their parents drive. So we don't have that endemic awareness in the culture like we'll have in maybe 20 years. And we'll just got to get through there. We're doing a lot of work, particularly, we've made some progress there as well. We've now moved from Cybersecurity Awareness Month to we've got an annual Cybersecurity Awareness campaign that's going to go year-round and carry some of those basic messages. Part of it is clarity on roles and responsibilities. What is the individual? Because individuals are going to have responsibilities. They are going to need to change the oil on their computers effectively. By analogy, what do they do? What does AT&T do? What does an antivirus company do? What does an operating system company do? We need clarity about who does what. And the last thing is we've just got to, as we evolve the ecosystem to be more secure, we've got to make it easier. There's pointers out there, but people just are confused. It's got to be, back when I was doing encryption policy, one of the people I worked with referred to double-click easy, fast, and cheap. Right? Security has got to get to a point, or at least for end users, that it's double-click.
If I could, I'd like to add a couple points in here. That I think that add to what's been said. First, about the speed of technology versus the speed of public policy. Technology is coming very fast. All technology is coming very fast. This technology has come extremely fast. Complicated public policy often takes decades. We heard about the strategic nuclear example. They've been through a great history of that. Lots of very complicated things like that really do take decades. Even some things that seem very simple to us took decades for us to figure them out. We talked about automobiles and our driving and whatnot. From the time automobiles started to really be produced, 1905 to 1910, until about 1925 or 1930, it took that long to figure out the traffic laws and the process for traffic control in this country. It took 15 or 20 years to sort out something that today we see as relatively simple, the process for dealing with traffic. This technology we're talking about today is, for those of us who are soldering computers back in the late 70s and early 80s, and you could say it was 25 years old, we're really talking about technology in mass production that's less than 20 years old. It's real proliferation of the internet's about 1995 through to today. This is young stuff. Public policy takes a lot longer than that. That's part of the problem, is the policy development of this has got a little ways to go. I make another comment too, in terms of public awareness. There are a lot of things driven by technology and other stuff that you need to get public awareness, and you need to get the public exercise before the body politic will deal with the problem. Some people will say today that we have financial problems and deficit problems and problems with benefits like Social Security we won't deal with until we hit the debt limit and things like that happen. I'm not sure that's true about cyber warfare. It was true 10 years ago. It was true 15 years ago. Over the last couple of years, a couple different administrations of both flavors have embarked upon a very aggressive, very large cyber program to address this issue, irrespective of general public awareness or being exercised about the problem. Our body politic is trying to deal with this problem very difficult. It will take a lot of hard work and a long time. Wonderful point you made earlier. This is hard. Charles.
I'd like to add a suggestion addressing the slow evolution of policy. I think one could speed this up a little bit by publicizing some things that are not generally known, but not considered very sensitive anymore. An easy example is drones with missiles. There was a time when there was an absolute no-no. I would have been fired, jumped out of the Corps had I talked about it. Now this is common knowledge. Not the details, not the particular attack, but the capability exists. And there's a lesson there, namely restrictions that made sense X years ago may not make sense today. Another example from the nuclear era, it is quite amazing how much our legal system delegated local control of the use of nuclear weapons if there was a decapitation attack. I mean, without going into excessive details, but individual airborne general officer command posts had the authorization to launch a retaliatory strike if the national command authority was gone. And there were safeguards built in to make sure of that. I mean, you couldn't just do it because you felt like it. There were carefully worked out criteria, and the delegation was firm. Now, that has not been talked about a lot, but it's not a secret anymore. And it was a scary way to live, but and in many ways now it's less scary. That may sound absurd to younger people, I think there are roads here, looking carefully at small, important pieces of history to show people, look, we've gone through these arguments before. We've come to the conclusion that it may be okay under certain circumstances to delegate things like the response time in the cyber issue. How much that can be delegated, I don't know, and I don't need to know right now, but I do know it was startling to know 30 years ago the delegation for a retaliatory strike, nuclear strike. Well, somebody ought to go back to this history and say, look, we've been there before. Would this be useful to you now? Something analogous. I mean, nothing's identical, as Dave pointed out. And I'm not putting it as a question, but just as a reminder.
So what I'd say is this. I think it is difficult to overstate the importance of transparency. Transparency provides incentives. It helps people become aware. We do need to, in order to have the public dialogue, in order to raise awareness, in order that the American people should understand what we're doing, to have the greatest degree of transparency possible while recognizing that there are things that cannot be talked about.
Sure. Tim Evans. So every study that you mentioned emphasizes the importance of international engagement in cyber. What's DHS's plan to do that? And who really has primary responsibility for that? Probably not the DHS, but it might be. General Schmidle's not here to speak for himself. So international cyber engagement.
Well, I mean, this cyber is generally horizontal, right? So the lead for overall international activity in the U.S. government is the State Department, and the State Department is heavily involved in this process. We in DHS are equally involved and have a number of different partnerships. We've worked heavily on the International Watch and Warning Network, in which a number of different, 26 or so, different governments participate to work together on operational and other collaboration. We've worked in a number of different fora, and there's ongoing activity both in our space and other spaces in places like the G8 and the OECD. And those are being worked in a coordinated and horizontal fashion. One of our big focuses is really the operational piece. How do we work together, cert to cert, so that we can respond as one global economy, if you will, to significant incidents? And there's been significant movement forward. I would note that when we ran Cyberstorm 3, which is our big every 2-year exercise, in September, October of last year, we had, I think, 11 different countries, 11 or 12 different countries, I've forgotten the specific number, that participated in that exercise. And over 2,000 people around the world did so. So we are working through those issues. International work is hard. We talk about all the barriers in the United States and all the difficulties we've got. The return on investment internationally is, I think, even harder because you've got a greater disparity of law and policy and norm. But it is equally true that no significant cyber incident is focused within one country now. So we are working across government to address that and with our partners in the private sector.
Go ahead, sir. Yeah, James Mining with the OpNap staff. We've talked about an analog of the nuclear era, driving policy, whether cyber's tactical or strategic. The bottom line, cyber warfare or cyber use, the cost of entry is minuscule compared to every other technology we used before. And not only that, the cost of implementation is. So not only can you develop a system, but you only need 3 or 4 experts or Jedi Knights to execute the attack. And we've also talked about now how most of it is in the civilian sector, and they're probably going to go, just like the bank robbers did, go after the money. So is there another analog where we've developed policy to protect the public from a small group by a nation state? In other words, most times we make strategies, nation state, large cross entry. Is there something else we should be looking at as well? And maybe is there a dual track to development strategy? Maybe there's a strategy that Cybercom is going to have to pursue, and maybe there's a track that DOJ is going to have to pursue because it's a criminal element that's the major threat.
Yes.
So what do you suggest that is the analog?
Well, I wish I knew the answer, but I think Phil does. So I'll talk about formulates it.
So what I want to avoid, there are lots of analogies, right? There really is, in a lot of ways, nothing new under the sun. But cyber does present a unique set of issues, the way it has all come together. But there are lessons we can learn from history, and there are different approaches. For example, while it's not analogous in every way, the low barriers to entry part is somewhat analogous to what we've seen in terrorism. There are lots of ways to distinct. One can be a terrorist and do things with a low degree of technical sophistication. There are a lot of elements of cyber activity that parallel cyber crime. And we have a history of how we do criminal enforcement. The problem we've got with using cyber deterrent, cyber criminal law as a deterrent right now, is it's just really hard to catch people. The attribution problem and the prosecution problem, that used to be my business, right? It's really hard to do. So one of the things that we definitely need to do as we build out a more secure ecosystem is have one where, at least for high-value transactions, and people need to be identified, that it's easier and cheaper to do that, so that when someone abuses those systems, they can be more strongly identified, and we can have better deterrence to that kind of activity. So if you're asking for here's an analogy that solves all our problems, I can't give you that. If the point is we need what amounts to a multi-element strategy that deals with the variety of different actors that we face, and recognize we may need different techniques and capabilities to address each of them, I agree with you completely.
You're actually pushing really hard on a think tank-ish kind of philosophical issue that we've wrestled with at the Potomac Institute, and I've written a piece on in the past, which has to do with technology really screwing up the way humans manage themselves. It was pretty easy to define these things when you said an individual could only kill 1 or 2 people before, that's about all with the tools of the day. Anybody who killed more than a few dozen people had to have the resources of a government. And so nations would go to war, and you say, well, this is only a nation can do this, and only an individual can do that. And if the individual did it, it's legal. If the nation did it, it's an act of war. Nice, easy constructs that we've built our whole body of law on. Technology is really screwing this up. Technology is giving individuals and small groups the power of nations to kill dozens, maybe hundreds. It's still probably unthinkable for an individual to build a nuclear weapon because they can't get a hold of the material. But individuals can go design biological weapons that could literally kill hundreds of thousands. Clearly, individuals can get enough weaponry today to kill a dozen people in Tucson, and if they'd been smarter, probably more than a dozen people. So individuals can have strategic impact on governments. This is screwing up our system of jurisprudence, if you will. Cyber is one of those technologies that's forcing the issue. I think as we figure out how to deal with the interface between dealing with things in a criminal justice system and dealing with things as acts of war, as we figure that out in the cyber world, we'll actually, I think, be paving the way for what other technologies are going to empower human beings to do to themselves. And so you're pushing on an issue that's bigger than cyber, but maybe cyber can help us sort out our system for dealing with these things as we go along. It's argued about all the time. You hear about whether this person is captured in the war on terror is a criminal and should be dealt with in our courts, or whether they're a prisoner of war and should be thrown in Guantanamo and dealt in the military system. So I think as a society we'll figure that out. I think we better quickly, because technology is going to make it worse.
Mike, if I just comment on that, that's absolutely right. And that's going to keep evolving. Absolutely. The only good news in everything I'm saying, it's not all happening at once. It's not like every guy out there who could do something to us is doing it to us. We got a major problem with this enemy combatant thing. Our legal system was not set up to deal with that kind of an attack. And as these guys are released, we're going to pay the price for that. The other thing that we have to think about in this is this seamless web. Let's just take Russia as an example, between cyber crime and cyber terrorist and cyber warrior. These guys are the same guys. They glom in and out. Who's paying me today? They're more like soldiers of fortune or whatnot. Why are you shooting this guy? Why are you kidnapping this guy? Because I was paid to do it. I was but we're going to have to work through all of these things. What I think we have to do, though, I think Phil's touched on two really important issues. One is this division of responsibility. Who's responsible for what? We've really got to keep working that. It almost doesn't matter in a certain point. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. As long as we all agreed that that's what we're going to do, it seems to me that that's a really major issue there. And the other is this public-private thing where we have got to, with terrorism, we pretty much came to a very quick consensus that people blowing people up in airports is not a personal affair. It's a national thing. It threatens the entire nation. It's not just the government spending resources to defend Mrs. Gummidge. And I think we need to get to a sort of something like that in cyber, where the line is between what you're supposed to do and what the government is supposed to do for you.
I think this quickly goes to issues bigger than just whether this is international law or domestic law, whether this is criminal, treating it as a criminal thing or as an act of war. It also borders on things like deterrence. The concept of acts of war has a lot to do with deterrence. If you do something I consider an act of war without regard to courts and due process, I'm going to go attack you with everything I've got, and I'm going to kill lots of your citizens. And that's supposed to be a deterrent. At some point, if you talk about deterrence in the world of cyber, if you're ever going to deter individuals and small groups, you have to have a response that actually deters. And it's questionable whether small groups and individuals in the terrorist format are deterred by the things we have to respond with today. So this is a very deep, very fundamental, very profound question you asked that I think our society is going to have to deal with. So I promise the next one to Rich Coleman.
The question is, in terms of private sector infrastructure, would it make sense over time to create, say, an organization that had standards, good housekeeping and civil critical, so to speak? So the 8,000 publicly traded companies, in their 10Ks, others have talked about this, most athletes talked about this. We'd have gold, silver, bronze. They've met whatever the standards are. It may vary between, say, financial institutions and industrial companies, large and small companies. Is that a good idea? Or
So that's for me. Those sorts of things already do exist on the broader infrastructure basis, like the PS prep standard that exists. I think we need to figure out what's the right construct for ensuring that the private sector, I mean, to me, it's almost less a question that has the right assistance, is rewarded for the activities that it undertakes. One of the things, for markets to work well, and in this space, we need markets to work well. Markets need both rules and data. And we lack sort of both of those things. An example is, let's say you want to buy a piece of software and you're trying to decide which is the better piece of software. How do you judge which is more secure than the other? There's no effective metric for that. There's common criteria, but the common criteria doesn't really tell you that. And we actually, cybersecurity is an area, not to use a bad analogy, but it's dominated by religion rather than science. I believe this is better. And it may be a very well-informed belief, but it's a belief as opposed to something that data shows. We've got to drive this into science so that markets can work in the right way. And things like good housekeeping seals of approval or other sorts of indicia of trustworthiness are certainly something to consider.
Charles Palmer, IBM, and the I3P at Dartmouth College. One of the issues I thought might come up here was the fact that these issues we face are happening at light speed. And when something happens fast, you have to already be resilient. Resilience to me is what cybersecurity is. It really is all about keeping the lights on, keeping the defenses up, keeping business, whatever. What can we do? We don't have a Sputnik to get everybody excited. And Estonia, sadly, didn't get everybody excited. And ABT and what can we do to encourage private industry, which runs most of the stuff that keeps us all happy? How can we encourage them to focus on resilience?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. We're talking about literally less than a second here. We're talking about decisions that, but it seems to me that we do have precedents once again where we have, as Charles pointed out, in the nuclear era, you can go to other countries, for instance, if you look at the missile defense decision that has to be taken by the Israeli prime minister versus a missile defense decision that might have to be taken by an American president, talking about totally different things. It was worked through, it was presented when, and I was there, it was presented as a showstopper for the Israeli aero system, that there would never be it possible for political man-in-the-loop to be involved in the decision. The reality is the Israelis came up with a system that they weren't happy enough with. Obviously, there's some pre-delegation. There's some things that have to be referred to the prime minister. And just like the guy who follows the American president around with a football, the Israeli prime minister has somebody who follows him around. And there's certain protocols on what has to go to him, what does not have to go to him, and what decisions have to be made. Now, we're not talking about nanoseconds there, but the point is we're still, it's not impossible for human beings to think through a contingency in which we say, these are the things that could happen, these are the things we will delegate, this is when it has to be referred back. I think you can do those things. How do you encourage industry? There's going to have to be a certain amount of regulation. I mean, I hate to say it as a good conservative. I hate to see, and we got to be very careful that it doesn't become an excuse for big government to come up with more and more and more regulations for everything. But the reality is, you can use tax breaks. There's things you could do to incentivize businesses, but in the end of the day, for certain businesses, there's just going to have to be, and there are, by the way, this is not new. There are going to have to be laws that simply say these are the things you will do. We have USDA inspectors in food plants. I mean, that is a reality. So I mean, this is not unheard of before that you're going to have to say.
In other countries, U.S. inspectors approve in Chinese food factories.
Yeah.
Occasionally they don't.
We're going to get Chinese inspectors here. And let me just say one thing about Estonia and Georgia. You're right, it didn't get the attention that one wished it would have. It's hard to, when you've got two shooting wars going on, By the way, I frequently get the answer in Georgia when I raise these issues. Yeah, I know, but we got Russian tanks here, you know, I mean, and then you said, you want to lose the other 19 regions too? I mean, you know, this is an issue. But I think we need to do a better job. And sometimes movies like, you know, Live Free or Die Hard, it's all, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of hype and a lot of rubbish there. But it does get people's attention of, wow, somebody could do this. I think there needs to be a lot more writing, a lot more discussion that goes out to the public on the kinds of things that happen. I think we can use the Estonian experience and the Georgian experiences here. These things could happen here. And I think we're just going to have to do it. I mean, the only other alternative is to throw up our hands and say, well, we haven't had World War II and the Korean War, so we're not going to be able to get anybody's attention. I think we need to try and get people's attention.
So you mentioned, to play off the comment about regulation, where are we on the legislative front then? What does the Obama administration or DHS bill want to see out of whatever bill takes shape?
So it's not my intent to make news today. The new administration position, but there are positions that we have taken that we put forward. For example, two of the things that we've clearly said that we in DHS want are additional flexibilities to enhance our own agility. For example, in terms of procurement and for hiring of the best talent, because there's obviously, we're all going to need more talent to be able to operate in this space, which is another entire discussion about building that. But that's an ongoing discussion, and I have no doubt there will be a lot of discussion over the course of the next year.
Why are the lights going on and all?
Well, I think somebody's trying to tell us. Some of our senior researchers in the back room were trying to signal me that they still have stuff to do today, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our speakers for a tremendous I hope you'll agree with me that that this is an example of how we really have some tremendous leadership in our government dealing with these tremendous issues at this time frame. And it's important to know, and it should be reassuring to you, that people like Phil and General Schmidle are on the job every day helping us with these issues. As I said this at the beginning, the outset, this is the beginning of a series of these types of forums at which the Potomac Institute hopes to host this type of discussion. Out of this, we intend to summarize some of these presentations and publish them as best we can in a forum that hopefully will inform and enhance the debate around Washington and, in fact, the world on these issues. So we welcome your input. Please send us cards and letters and input of any type that you feel appropriate, because we really do need your thoughts and your scholarship on these issues. Future events that we have planned at the moment include a forum on deterrence in the cyber world, the roles of government versus the roles of commercial in the cyber world, and then a couple of seminars on the impacts of future technologies. If you think it's bad now, wait till you see the technologies that are just around the corner that are going to make this really hard. And we're going to start that on the 17th of February with a technical session on neurotechnology. We're starting to interface computers to people's brains, genetics, and all the ethics in and around that. And we'll graduate from that in a future session to the impacts of things like quantum computing on this entire endeavor. As I say, when you look down into what those technologies will do to the information age, you ain't seen nothing yet. So, but look in the future to have help. Hopefully you'll come to some of the sessions on things like deterrence and government as well as commercial equities in this range. So thank you very much for coming. I would appreciate all of your input and your help. And please, once again, join me in thanking our speakers.